everyone. Welcome to our little fireside chat coming to you live from our respective homes in the greater Cincinnati, Ohio area in the United States. My name is Becky Blank. I'm the Director of Technical Operations for a small digital agency based here in Cincinnati called Ample. And I'm here with Taylor MacDonald, who is my colleague and CTO of Ample, and Matt Welty, who is the CTO of Crossroads Church. And I will let them introduce themselves. Matt, why don't you go first?
Sure. I've been with Crossroads for 9 years. We're a church based in Cincinnati, Ohio, now 25 years in the making, with 12 physical locations, now a really robust online digital strategy, one of the faster growing, larger churches in America.
Taylor?
Yep. My name is Taylor MacDonald. I am partner and CTO at Ample. As Becky mentioned, we're a small digital agency in downtown Cincinnati and largely just responsible for architecture, consultation, technical execution, innovation, direction, stuff like that. So I'm really excited to be here and talk about this today.
Yeah. So what we're going to talk about today is we have endeavored, the three of us, along with an army of other folks, have endeavored to take on a pretty big task for Crossroads, the organization, the church. And Ample's been working with Crossroads for about 5 years now. We've been an agency partner and helping support a lot of their digital initiatives, and from UX and design to architecture and execution. And so one of the larger initiatives that we've taken on in the last couple of years has been to migrate their previous web stack and application stack over to a much more modern architecture. And so I want to start just by explaining the piece where this is a church. So Matt, if you could just tell us a little bit about who is Crossroads and why would a church care about modern technology and modern web application architecture?
Sure. It doesn't feel like a natural fit right away. We are, like I mentioned, Crossroads has been around for 25 years. Even when we were first founded, the sort of core reason for why even start another church, in this case, it was just the feeling that we wanted to be able to connect people with all the things that a church provides without extra barriers or rules or jargon that can sometimes get caught up in the church. And so we didn't want you to have to know the insider language of a church to be able to understand who God was, be able to benefit from being a part of the church. Mm-hmm. But 25 years later, the culture has changed, people have changed. And so the same heart is true. We don't want to have additional barriers. So I think about it as the church has always, when it's at their best, gone to people, to serve people. And what that looks like today is reaching people and serving people who are living digital first lives. And so the church itself has to develop digital first tactics and strategies and ways of serving the community and the people who are part of the church in a digital first way. So this is we've journeyed with you, Ample, for this for 6 years. We've been figuring this out together. What does it look like for a church to do this could be unique? But to us, having modern infrastructure, even one layer deeper, in 2021, there's no such thing as good enough for a church. So when people are choosing, especially in the digital space, the things that are going to help them achieve their goals, are going to help them connect with others, everything has to be excellent. And so as we pursued different strategies through content creation, we've just recognized that the experience that people have with Crossroads Church needs to be as excellent as they have with any digital platform or product they experience elsewhere.
Can you speak to the rationale for hiring that externally? In other words, why would you reach out to, a secular agency to support that endeavor? What's the business thinking there?
Expertise. At the end of the day, I've worked for a church for 9 years. I've developed some expertise on the things that are specific to churches. But when I wanted to try to help Crossroads navigate to the sort of next place of being culturally current and removing the barriers of having to even specifically come into a church building at a particular time and place to experience what a church offers, we needed people who were fluent in the language that the people we were trying to reach spoke, which they were all digital natives. So for us, that just looked like we needed expertise, people who, the tactics that a church can use don't have to be different than are used in any other industry or marketplace. And so we just all translate them to whatever context we're doing with whatever business objective or church mission or objective we have. So we just wanted to borrow from all of those best practices and learnings that you guys and others had already had.
Awesome. And then give us a little bit of setup. How would you describe the state of Crossroads digital experience circa 2015, 2016?
Sure. Very hopeful, but not very prepared. I think our vision was much larger than our capabilities at the time. So I think we've all joked about really long, like watching the circle loading on the website, this desire to reach and serve as many people as possible, but not really even understanding what capabilities we as an organization were bringing that needed to be translated to the digital space. So it was confusing. We were already a large organization at that point, relatively speaking. So there were lots of stakeholders and processes that were in place that made change difficult, not insurmountable, because we really wanted to move towards being culturally current. But there was an existing model that was working, that we were also beginning to try to adopt a digital first model at the same time. And that brings lots of organizational change challenges as well.
Gotcha. Let me point over here at Taylor. Taylor, could you give us a little bit of background on what that architecture actually looked like behind the scenes that was creating the 14-second spinny wheel?
Yeah, let me put this in terms of like the technical challenges circa 2016. So we had a number of issues that we were trying to deal with. A lot of them centered around developer experience and just general, complexity within the application. We had a massive single page application, which was an Angular 1.5 app right around the same time. Angular 2 came out. There were like countless release candidates, and there was a bunch of interest in the team to upgrade to Angular 2, but how to do that in a manner, given the compatibility between those two different versions of that framework, was kind of complicated. Some of the more logistical challenges were things like 30-minute build times. It was taking forever for us to actually compile the work and get it deployed into production. We had just in general, like poor developer experience. It was hard, it was brittle, it took a long time, a lot of resources to run the application locally, and just the volume of data that was being consumed in a single page app for the sprawling content operation was a challenge, to say the least. And that resulted primarily in poor performance for end users. So we were seeing I think you mentioned 14-second load times. That was problematic. We saw lots of regressions from a QA standpoint. We were doing manual rollbacks after 30-minute. We were doing 30-minute builds, deploying those to production. And if we found an issue as we were smoke testing, we were having to manually roll those back. There was very little orchestration. Of course, this was pretty early, in that whole like automated DevOps time. So it's not that it was a negligent decision based on the owners of the product at that time. It just wasn't as viable a solution as it is today. We had a number of single points of failure. Nothing was configured for high availability or auto failover. So all of our DevOps operations in all of our prod support stuff was extremely reactive. That created a lot of headaches. It was pretty painful, I think, for stakeholders like Matt and others to kind of see this stuff. And we had caching issues and all sorts of things were problematic. From a content standpoint, we were reliant on an aging LAMP stack, open source CMS. It was a great solution at the time, but there was a number of issues with it in that we had a lot of markup and a lot of content tightly coupled together. So Crossroads is an omni-channel operation in that they deploy a lot of this content to different verticals, such as a native application and OTT apps and the website, et cetera. And that's just not possible when you've got a bunch of really specific presentation stuff interspersed with your content. So that was a problem. There have been a number of customizations made to the CMS as well, which effectively broke the upgrade path. So I think there were probably security issues that we were not being super sensitive to. Following some of those dilemmas, the architect that Crossroads had on staff came up with a really creative idea to move to a more micro front-end solution and move some of these pages, particularly the higher trafficked and critical operation pages, from the single page app in Angular into a server-side rendered monolith. So we chose Phoenix and Elixir as this. It allowed us to start decoupling that single page application. We got a little bit better performance. We were able to start implementing discrete products outside of that Angular 1.5 application using Angular 2 and other versions of that framework. We were able to use template inheritance to share some of the global features of the page, such as the header and the footer across different portions of the application. So that was really great. Unfortunately, the downside was that there was a number of problems with that approach, primarily domain knowledge around that particular framework, Phoenix. I think there might have been like 5 experts in the tri-state area at the time that were like really comfortable in that environment. So that was problematic. We had production support issues. We had really complicated routing issues as we were trying to migrate the transition from this Angular application into the Phoenix app. Caching is always hard, no matter what. And so we saw a bunch of issues there too. So I think the intention was good and it paved the way for the future solution that we brought to bear on the Jamstack. But yeah, there was definitely some challenges at that time.
Can you speak a little bit to what is that future solution? What was our general strategy, knowing that set of problem statements that you just described at a high level?
Yeah, right. So the micro front-end solution that had been kind of brought forth by the team early on really paved the way for us to move towards Netlify. And so the idea is that we would, one, the concept of a micro front end is one where you can associate ownership of different portions of the application alongside different teams. So that actually dovetailed really well into the structure of the digital product team at Crossroads. They had already kind of associated ownership of different portions of the application with each of these discrete teams. And therefore, it dovetailed extremely well into the strategy, which I think Matt Billman, the CEO of Netlify, actually coined the term to me in 2018 when we had a conversation, and he called it gradual migration. And it's the idea that we'll set up a reverse proxy on Netlify, and we will basically pass all traffic for anything that doesn't exist on the CDN back to the legacy applications. This allowed us to gradually move over portions of the website to the Jamstack over time. So effectively, that was the strategy, and we've done a couple case studies and conversations about that if you're looking for, actual nuts and bolts of how we accomplished that.
Sweet. So Matt Welty, not Matt Bowman, can you speak a little bit to why that kind of overall strategy of gradual migration and moving to static pages being served up on Netlify? Why is that a good idea for the organization at this time?
I think for us, there were, I can zoom into the practicalities. Part of even our staffing model heavily depends on consultants and contractors to staff augment. That also means part of that choice is we deal with high attrition. So at the same period of time, we had senior leaders leaving, we had senior developers leaving with tons of knowledge about, to Taylor's point, products they own. That the problem was that they were tightly interdependent with almost everything else in the stack. Being able to separate these things into these smaller components was really helpful way to even customize this for the way that we were approaching staffing. But at the zoomed out level, at this point as a church, we had thousands of people who were attending our church online, who were a part of Crossroads, who weren't coming into our building. And also, just predating this, as we were getting this started, there would be Sunday mornings where I would wake up to a text message saying that the church building, i.e. the website, was closed. So to some of those single point of failures, that inability to scale, and the church can't be closed. That can't be a thing that happens. That can't be the barrier that we put in between helping and serving the community. And so for us, it became mission critical. This was, we want to go from being able to care for thousands of people online to hundreds of thousands of people online. And that was impossible unless we made this transition. We wanted to be able to pivot in certain places of the website faster than we needed to be able to pivot the entire website. I was not willing to go through a time period where we were going to have production go down so that we could do this massive cutover to bring back up this new thing. We needed to be developed. At this time, I think we were starting, Crossroads Media. So articles, podcasts, all these things were starting to come out. We needed that new stuff to be able to come online quickly. And I couldn't wait for the old legacy stuff to be fixed to do that. And so this idea of this gradual migration was a way that we could pursue the new without having to totally update all of the legacy stuff. And we could do that over time and get to the point where everything then was on the new stuff.
Very cool. Very cool. Taylor, maybe you could recap a little bit about how we even sold this strategy in. Like, we had the vision. I remember you coming in one day and just feeling like, I got it. I figured it out. I had this conversation. I have a path forward. I know how we're going to do this. But then it took a lot of change management for us to convince everybody that this was the approach that we should go with. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, your point is accurate. The change management was probably the biggest challenges that we had. The way we accomplished this was just repeated clear communication for the team. We kind of cast vision in a number of different forums, both in terms of like lunch and learns, sprint review, constant, we do community of practice meetings, we do refinements and things like that. We just kind of like continue to beat that drum. Largely, we sort of couch this all in terms around lack of domain knowledge, complexity, just in general, complicated routing, caching challenges, tight coupling to legacy systems, performance and scale. And so that was kind of like the positioning statements that we made to the team to get them to sort of buy in. Because we had already kind of started experimenting, Matt mentioned the media project. That was kind of our first foray into using the Jamstack and just general static site generation, Netlify as a platform. So we had a fair amount of perspective on what the platform offered us, and that kind of became the catalyst that encouraged us to move forward with that recommendation. And because we had already established ownership across these different paths, or what we call micro clients within this micro front end architecture, it wasn't that hard of a sell, frankly. I think most of the team understood what those challenges were and recognized the value in solving some of those problems. In terms of like how we actually cast that vision, we did that around 3 different phases. I always think it's helpful to be like, hey, here's where we are today, here's where we're going, here's what we accomplished last sprint. The 3 different phases of this migration process was phase 1, we were going to implement a new CMS. We ultimately chose Contentful for a number of reasons, which we can unpack later if you want. But we ultimately went with Contentful to resolve some of our content administration issues and sort of cast a plan for cleaner, content segregation from presentation. We initially migrated the server-side rendered pages from our Phoenix application onto Netlify, and then we just proxied all the traffic back to the old legacy systems. That was phase 1. Phase 2, our plan was to decouple any of those other microclients, either from the old Angular app or the Phoenix application, and promote those up to the Netlify platform. And then phase 3 was basically clean everything up and dismantle those old systems. And we kind of just beat the drum on that over time, and it seemed pretty effective.
Excellent. Can you speak a little bit about some of the risks that were involved and how we mitigated those?
Sure. So obviously, like the biggest risk was communication, making sure that everybody from stakeholders to worker bees were both on board and marching in the same direction. So communication was really big, just general team continuity, making sure that everybody understood where we were going and what we had accomplished. I'll be honest that I felt like the biggest problem that we had to surmount was Big Bang cutover. I want to say, Matt, maybe you can clarify, but there was like a huge Big Bang operation that took place initially, maybe 2014 or early 2015 for the organization. And there was a lot of scars, I think, that had resulted from that. So we were pretty sensitive to that dilemma. And therefore, that is why we felt so confident about gradually moving this over, meaning maintaining 2 systems over time might be a little bit financially more difficult, but actually reduces operational risk and communication risk for the entire team. And so we were feeling pretty confident about that. Another risk that we saw was just a consistent implementation across microclients. And that's one that kind of still lingers. I think that's going to be a consistent issue, particularly in the way that we're leveraging reverse proxies as opposed to a true micro front-end application. But yeah. Cool.
And talk a little bit more about the migration path, how long it took, and kind of you just outlined the phases, but what were some of those kind of smaller steps that we took in that migration path?
Yeah, so the biggest was visual consistency. So what we got out of the Phoenix application was that template inheritance, or that concept of like, here's your layout, and then the actual meat of the page is what's populated by each individual route and the controller and templates associated with that particular path. So we first started by understanding like the one true global element across the site was that global navigation. And we went through a whole bunch of gyrations of like building out a really like kind of nasty self-extracting JavaScript file to do that early on, and then quickly realized we needed something a little more substantial. So we actually eventually migrated to a true component library. We ended up landing on a product called Stencil.js, which is a framework agnostic JS component library. The benefit of this one is that even though predominantly we were using a lot of Angular, if we ever decided to graduate to React or Vue or other, even just the statically generated pages, that we could use Stencil to compile those common elements down to module definitions that would work in those different verticals. And that actually worked out extremely well. We're still using it today. The actual way that we went about doing this was we stood up the highest traffic pages on Netlify first, things like the homepage, location pages, the sign-in page, stuff like that. Yeah. And then we literally just set up a reverse proxy to send all traffic for any path that didn't exist back to the old systems. And as we were standing up Contentful, you might imagine we had a bunch of different microclients that were tightly coupled to the schema coming off that old PHP CMS. And somebody had a really creative idea of setting up a Lambda function that would normalize data coming off Contentful and turn it into the schema that the microclients were bound to and were expecting, which I thought was a really creative solution. It gave us the space to migrate directly to Contentful, start using that as the source of truth without like indiscriminately breaking other things along the way.
Very cool. Okay, so we did the thing. It took us, I think, maybe 6 to 9 months. I mean, there's still little bits and pieces happening today. It was a lengthy process, relatively speaking. We ran it agile, and we got the majority of it cut over in about a 6 to 9 month time window. So it's all said and done at this point. We're up and running. We've been up and running for maybe a year or two now. Matt, can you tell us a little bit about the successes of that? What has that done for the organization?
Sure. Well, 14-second load time is gone. It's like very, very practically, the user experience that people were trying to serve drastically improves. And from my vantage point, scalability, reliability, like I get the benefit of peace of mind and no more text messages Sunday morning saying church is closed because the website can't load.
Yeah.
But I think too, 2020 happened to everyone. And so like, while this certainly wasn't in preparation for that, we were preparing for the future and accidentally prepared for the pandemic, so our church buildings were closed for the majority of 2020. And yet we were prepared for that. And so the people who were a part of our church, used to going into buildings, occasionally watching online, to the people who were exclusively a part of our church because of what we were offering online, continued to be a part of our church, and not just those people, we were actually continuing to reach new people. And so, at the end of 2020, we were able to celebrate not a year where our church or organization took a year off or just survived, but because we were able to keep the people in our communities connected, we did what the church does. So, like medical workers were helped, and, supplies were taken out, and we raised money for different things. And this was all made possible. And frankly, I would say, like, as I talked to my peers a year ago, March 2020, when the pandemic cutover happened and our building shut down, most churches, and I know many organizations, were caught in a lurch. And so even the systems that people were using to stream their church services online suddenly didn't scale and weren't reliable. And I was thankful that we didn't hit any of those hitches, which was noble. And even, so much so, in April, May of 2020, we decided to do a rebrand. So of all the things that you would ever do during pandemic, our brand had been the same for 20 plus years. We're about to have a 25th anniversary. And, over the course of 2 to 3 months, we were able to entirely update the brand of our website. And on a go live weekend, because that's how you do it in a church for some reason, you're going to, launch on the weekend on Sunday service.
Yeah.
The website went flawlessly from the old brand to the new brand, and it's because of the work that you guys had helped lay for us, which was great.
Very cool. in our last few minutes, Taylor, any other successes from a technical end that you want to point out now that we've been stable for a couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, it's a personal testament to all the Jamstack principles: scale, performance, security. The support at Netlify has been absolutely phenomenal. In fact, I'm like on a first name basis with half of them over there, and it's kind of funny. But they offered us things that we could not guarantee ourselves, things like 4 nines of availability, which is like 52 minutes of downtime per year. It's ridiculous. And they've been able to maintain that kind of guarantee as well. Things like developer empowerment. Now all of our routing logic lives directly alongside our code base. We get the benefits of Lambda functions, Netlify functions. We get the benefit of shared environment variables, things like forms. We don't actually use those today, but we probably should consider that. Deployment previews were absolutely critical in the rebrand effort. We were able to do that work in a silo and immediately just cut over and promote that to production. We were ready to go. The other tools that Netlify offers, such as build plugins, their CLI has been extremely handy. We are extremely excited about the edge handlers for personalization efforts and being able to kind of augment the request response cycle at the edge. It's really exciting. And I will also say that their analytics product recently saved us on a recent product launch. And if it were not for that, I think we'd be kind of in hot water with Matt here. But I will tell you that, yeah, it's been a really positive experience across the board.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for your time today. This was lovely chatting and recapping this really awesome endeavor that we've undertaken for the last couple of years. It makes me proud to have been part of that project. And Matt, we really just appreciate your time and your partnership, truly. So thanks.
Thank you, guys.